I've seen people totally find the ease in their parasympathetic system once they have the right support to not carry the panic, the life or death threat that was from a moment in time.
Welcome to Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. I am your host, Simon Brazier. At Truehope Cast, we explore the many psychological and physiological dimensions of mental health, bringing you motivation, inspiration, knowledge, and practical solutions for navigating yourself in this beautiful but wild world. Today, psychologist, educator, and author Annie Brook discusses how early experiences influence the nervous system and our emotions, relationships, and behaviors throughout life. Today, we're going to explore why sensitivity isn't a weakness, while talking alone isn't always enough to heal trauma, what parents need to know about struggling children, and how the brain and body work together in healing. We're also going to be discussing the overlooked role of nutrition and supporting the body's biology to aid nervous system healing and regulation. This hopeful, insightful talk aims to give you new compassion and understanding for yourself and your children and others. Here is my conversation with Annie Brook. Enjoy the show. Okay, hi Annie, welcome to Truehope Cast. Thank you so much for being with me, for being with us today. How are you and what is going well?
Well, first off, I'm very happy to be here. I love your mission of nutrition and how essential that is. And what's going well is I'm in the middle of teaching a seminar right now for therapists, for trauma therapists. And we're studying the earliest impressions from birth, prenatal time. And a lot of my passion is sharing tools that help people heal.
Wow.
And I share the tools that are psychological, relational, neuroscience-based, and you bring in those great nutrition tools. And I think we have a lot to talk about and enjoy.
I completely agree with you. And I love the mission for nutrition. I'm going to steal that on my next Truehope meeting. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
So we're going to be discussing what if your trauma started at birth today. But before we jump into that topic, would you mind letting us know a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Yes, I am 72 years old. I'm a somatic psychologist, meaning I am a therapist that works with into body sensation, body signals, and what are the imprints that affect our responses in life. And I've been doing this for over 4 decades, over 45 years. I was the director of body psychotherapy for a master's program at Europa University. I've run my own clinic for 17 years, and now I have the Brook Institute, which is a training program for it. It's both online classes for people who want to look in the mirror with some help, because often we can't change the world around us or blame it forever. We have to look in the mirror and help ourselves figure out how to thrive. And that's my mission and my passion. I have an Instagram channel, I have a YouTube channel, just sharing the tools that heal and training therapists. I've worked with children, families. I've been in the public schools as a therapist. I've volunteered at hospitals with the child trauma units. And I just have had years of loving people. It's how do you hold that love in a way that helps someone learn resilience.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to jump into birth's hidden legacy. Many people assume that their memories begin maybe later in childhood. But what led you to discover that birth and infancy can leave lasting impressions on the nervous system? And how do those early experiences show up in adulthood?
It was a combination of personal experience, my own healing in my own life, and clinical study and theoretical study and practical experience as a clinician where people would show me, when I was working with children, they would start to show me their birth story. And so for myself, I was born premature, which meant I was whisked away from my mom and put in an incubator. And I didn't have any touch for 10 days.
Wow.
And we know that contact is a basic need, especially for an infant, because they're using their parent to help them orient to, is the world safe? Will I survive? Will I survive in relationship? And ultimately, the child is saying to the parent, will you keep me safe? And that I call the biological imperative. It's right in our brainstem and our physiology. And so for me, I was one of those hyper reactive temper tantrum kids. And my mom didn't know what to do with me. And it was not until my 40s, I was really starting to study this work that I realized, oh, I always had to do things perfectly. Why? Why would I get so frustrated if I couldn't get something figured out? As a kid, you can see these kids, they're like trying so hard and it's not working. And for me, I was afraid I would be put back in the incubator if I wasn't perfect.
Oh.
And that was an impression well before I could think. That whole experience of isolation, invasive, like a tube up my nose, heel pricks. I had both abandonment and invasion as an infant. Now, I was raised in a good family. I had parents that were present and capable. And why does my mom have such a reactive little girl? So that was always a puzzle. And then in my 20s, I had pretty big trauma where I was living in Maine, and with a partner, we had built our house, we had cut the trees, we lived on the land, and my partner started drinking, and I didn't even know a thing about it. So all of a sudden, my main companion is not very present. And so I went back to my parents to try to figure out what to do. And I get a phone call, the house has burned down.
Oh my
So
God.
now I'm having this sort of trauma of my partner not being present. And now the house we spent, from the ground up building is gone. And my animals were killed. And it was just a huge trauma. And that sent me into a healing crisis, which I wouldn't know the words for it at that age even. I didn't know what it was. But what I realized is there's a world, that I have to make some choices here. And of course, my choice was, well, we committed to our project. I'm just going to keep this commitment. But I was getting more and more numb. And that's what people do under trauma, is they find some coping mechanism. They shut down, or they withdraw in a cave, or they act like everything's fine, but they're not actually thriving. They're not present. And so then in order to get income, because I was a stoneware potter and all of my work burned up in a way, I got a job on a fishing boat off Cape Cod. So now I'm fishing to make a living and coming home every 3 weeks. And at one point, I was so worried that my brain wasn't functioning. And that's when, that's where you work with how to feed the brain with nutrition. And my brain was getting fed with worry, so much worry about what to do, and that I couldn't really think straight. And so I came in, we came in from 4 days of fishing, and my job was to sell any extra lobsters we got up on the wharf for money for the crew. So I had to climb up this metal ladder and go sell my lobsters. And I had what's called a near-death experience. I was up on the ladder, up at the top, and it was a very low tide. And I got ready to get over the cap rail. And all of a sudden, because of all my worry and everything, I just let go. Like a combination of exhaustion and poor brain function. And in that moment, I had these epiphanies. It was like I was being held in love. Time slowed completely down. I watched my body doing these spirals through the air. And had I fallen exactly straight down, I would have been impaled on a water tank that was below the ladder and had rebar. But what happened is I spiraled through the air. I was held in love, and I had this insight of, if my body survives, I'll go back. And if it doesn't, it won't matter, because what matters is this amount of love.
Mm.
I love seeing behind you where it says true hope. I was being held in hope because I wasn't scared. And then what happened is my body moved just sideways enough to hit a tire, an old tire, and bounce. And then I was back in it. And I was like, what just happened to me?
Mm.
And I climbed back up and sold my lobsters. But within a month, I was in Berkeley, California, studying meditation. And because I had made a vow to myself, I want to feel this much love from inside my body. And I want to understand that depth of spirit, because I felt the grace of God, the grace of spirit in that moment. And so I found a meditation school, and I started learning what to do with my brain. Instead of making it worry, 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 I actually could start using sensation awareness and stabilizing practices. I actually shared that practice on my Instagram, and it went viral. It had 160,000 views. And what those kind of practices taught me is we can learn. We can self-correct our own brain, given the right kind of guidance and support. And so for me, I found myself in this meditation school. I studied, I meditated. And do you know the difference between, Simon, between discursive meditation and just, empty your mind?
No.
The difference, I could never have done one of those, just sit and empty your mind. My mind was way too active. There was no way I could have done that. I would have failed at being a meditator. But what the Sufi-based practice did is it gave your mind something to do that was corrective and supportive.
Oh, I see.
So we would visualize like grounding your energy like a tree. Mm-hmm. Like you have roots and you can feel and see and ground. And then we would visualize opening our heart. Like, okay, imagine you can breathe through your heart. And so we're giving awareness to sensation, and we're giving intention. Okay, I want to breathe through my heart. And then this is the part that stabilized my brain, is worry is right here behind the cortex and the limbic brain. And they taught us to imagine that you are creating an axis side to side through your ear level, and you just travel that axis until you find the middle. And then we were creating an axis from the forehead out the base of the skull at a diagonal. And then you would go forward and back, and your viewers can try this. Can you actually feel side to side and find the middle? Yeah, and then it's like, there it is. And then can you, from the forehead to the base of the occiput, can you go forward and back and find the middle? And what that does, that axis, puts you in the center of your head, which now I know all the neuroscience because I studied it all, but at the time I didn't know. They just called it be in the center of your head so you can see clearly. You're not in all your fears or your filters or your projections from your trauma history. And that began me having lots of really insightful experiences that felt like I was connecting with my own soul and my own spirit, my own sort of will to live.
Mm-hmm.
It was very empowering. Simultaneously, I got enrolled in a 4-year training program that used body-based awareness. It's called Neo-Reichian breath work and bioenergetics, and then group process dynamics, and then Gurdjieff studies of personality. So I was in this training program where we were moving breath through the body and we were identifying chronic muscular habits and looking in the mirror like, oh, what do I do? It might not be the same thing that you do under stress, but what do I do? And all of a sudden, I was healing. I began to thrive. I opened a clinical, I started my first therapy practice. I volunteered at Children's Hospital. I loved working with the children who were really suffering from difficult life. And that gave me such a great understanding in practical life. How can you help people? How can you bring resources? Because I was finding it, and it was a combination of the mindfulness of meditation, the emotional work through the breath and the body movements. And then I added sort of improvisational study, how to move, how to roll on the floor, how to, use dance. And so it was body, mind, spirit simultaneously. And I saw that for me, I couldn't have had just one track. If I had just done meditation, it would not have helped me physically get the fluidity that I needed. If I had just done movement, it wouldn't have helped me stabilize and organize my brain. And if I had just done the emotional stuff, it wouldn't have helped me have stability in my body physically or strength, and it wouldn't have given me necessarily the connection to spirit. So I really feel like body-mind practices bring you in touch with your own inner spirit. And
Beautiful.
To me, that experience, one, saved my life, but also gave me the mission to share what I learned. And I've been doing it ever since.
Amazing, Annie. Such a great story. Thank you so much. There's so much, so many things that have come up in regards to questions there and connections there. But I'd love to just mention one thing that I think you'll resonate with is that obviously this traumatic thing has happened to you, and it changed your life. And people experience trauma every day in different varieties, different flavors. And I think that our new inappropriate cultural reaction to trauma is get over it and get on with it. And I think that we have actually lost a skill set that humanity grew for millennia in regards to that sensational awareness that you spoke about old knowledge, ritual, spirituality, community. I think that when trauma would have happened to us, because it would have happened in abundance 10,000 years ago. And I think that we would have had skill sets and practices, rituals, dances, medicine men, medicine women, the elders would have had these types of practices that you've had to gone to school, and people go to school to learn to do, to heal yourself and then help heal others. I think that that's a part of our culture that we used to have that we no longer have the ability for. And it's a blessing now that we do have people like yourself who are able to reteach individuals the skill sets necessary to help people deal with the trauma that they've experienced consciously, like in an accident, for example, but also like going back to, when we're born, our birth story, and when we're young and we can't really remember these things, and our brains are developing, our nervous systems are developing, and we create a story, and that trauma has to sit somewhere, and we're able to actually work through those things. I think that we have, we've lost that ability, but it's amazing that we've got people like yourself that are helping people reconnect that, re-understand that, and do their own work, and then hopefully pass it on to the next generation.
Yeah, that's always the wish. And, I'm so grateful for the elders I've studied with and the different traditions. I worked in Africa for 2 years with a project of nutrition. And one of the things and I also lived on Lopez Island, which was a community that did a lot of community ritual. Like we would gather for the solstice, or we had a native Arapaho elder who was teaching us, how do you pray in a sweat lodge? How do you use the community? In Africa, I was able to witness a funeral of one of the elders of a tribe, and we were invited to be there, and they danced for 6 months. They had a nightly gathering, and they danced, and the women would dance, and then the men, and then they would dance together. And it was the ritual of real life. And I think what you're saying, I think that personal ritual is something instinctive in our bodies. I know my father died when I was 2.5, and he was an Air Force pilot and a test pilot. And in the process of, I'm sure I was at his there's pictures of being at his military funeral, 3 little girls and my mom in our little dresses. When I was age 7, I didn't know why I was doing this. I would carefully take my wax paper bag from lunch, my little sandwich bag, carefully fold it, put it in my pocket. On the way home, I was riding my bicycle. I would stop every day at this dirt lot that had a yield sign up on the corner, one of those yellow signs. And I would park my bike. I would walk out on the sand. I would dig a hole. I would bury my lunch bag. And then I would step back and I would go, do, 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 do. And that was a very important ritual. And what was I doing? You have to think, what is this child showing me? In my child therapy, I'm always looking at, what is the child showing me? There's a hidden story they're trying to tell. And that does go all the way back to birth. But for me, I was trying to integrate the death of my father. I was sort of reenacting burying, folding, because they would have folded the flag. You watched them do all that.
Yeah.
And then they would have played the taps music. So here I was at age 7, integrating with ritual. And so in my therapeutic work, I encourage people to find their personal ritual. And it's rituals of health. And that's what practices are. When you start to do a practice, it can become a ritual of health, not an obsession, but a ritual, a tool, just like nutrition. You can't get obsessed about it because then you're a fanatic and people don't want to listen to you. But if you know what you're talking about and you have your ritual of self-care, it makes a huge difference in how you live life.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, I think reminds me of a quote that I just looked up because I couldn't remember the whole thing, but it's, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate, meaning that, if you refuse to confront your internal conflicts or suppressed emotions, the outer world is going to force you to experience them, and life experiences will appear out of your control and what we call fate, when they are actually unconscious patterns like playing out. I think that's an interesting way of being able to connect the inner world and your outer world and your experience as a human being. And I'd love to get your opinions, because I think when people visualize therapy, traditional talk therapy, you've got the couch there that individual will be lying on their back, and you've got the individual there with their glasses and notepad taking notes, and traditional kind of like talk therapy. A lot of people think about it like that, but we've got this great so many great somatic practitioners that are doing way more than that in regards to like work with the body. Because I don't think the talk therapy is nowhere near enough. I don't think talking about your negative problems for an hour every week for years and years is a particularly helpful practice if you're not engaging your physical body at the same time. So you've said, and I read on your website, you said that talking about trauma isn't always enough.
Mm-hmm.
So why is healing through the body so important, and what are some of the ways people can begin to reconnect with their body safely?
That's a great question. And, fortunately, in my own healing experience, I had to take step by step so that I did feel safe enough to organize what was a distressing event. So if we think about trauma, I like to distinguish between shock and trauma. Now, shock, I used to be an EMT, and if someone was in a state of shock, you went into like triage. What do we need to do to keep this person alive? But what shock means is simply that you are so inundated with sensation and sensory input that you cannot process. Mm-hmm. On an emotional, psychological level, shock means you are, instead of having access to movement and response, you are frozen.
Yep.
And if you think about it, like a little quick neuroscience idea is just that we have a lovely flow in our nervous system, which is called an autonomic nervous system. It's usually below the level of thinking, but we can find it. We can learn how to feel it. But there's the healthy movement and play and recreation, and there's healthy digest and rest. And we want to have a nice sensory motor loop, meaning that we can have sensory input and we can respond. And that keeps us in our healthy animal nature, that we have choice. So in a baby, primitive reflexes are you touch a baby's hand and they grab your finger. Mm. You think of that as stimulus response or sensory motor. And that's called a sensory motor loop. Now, when there's something like, say you have a very angry parent that's always shouting, you're not going to have a sensory motor loop anymore. You're going to have sensory guarded.
Yeah.
My motor is going to be to guard and freeze. Or some people will try to shout back, right. All kinds of things. So we want to refresh the body mind back to healthy sensory motor loop. And we do that by resting our cheek against the experiences we've accumulated, even if we don't know them yet. How we do it is we pay attention to our sensation. Because once we've learned to numb out, some people don't remember a thing about their childhood. And it's especially true a thing about their birth until you give them the skills to slow way down. We call that calling a pause, so that the body can catch up with the speed of thought. Thought, it can be so fast, but we want to slow down so that we can actually notice, oh, my heart is pounding, or oh, my tummy is tied up in a knot, or I'm just feeling anxiety. We want to notice the sensory feedback, and then we want to inquire why. Like, why right here sitting with me in this moment, why are you anxious? And they're having a memory. Now, what we call this in body therapy is precognitive memory before the age of 3 is called implicit, meaning you had experience, but you had no context. Mm-hmm. You didn't have a brain that, like an example, I never knew I would get out of the incubator. I didn't know, oh, this is a moment in time. And it won't be this way forever. For babies, everything is forever.
Mm-hmm.
And they pick up this raw sensory, and they can even pick up other people's sensory, and start, if one baby cries, the whole room can start crying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we call that the development during an infancy, we call it existential, that they are just part of existence. And that can be existential shock. So if something happens where the baby's trying to get out the birth canal and the mom's given anesthesia, all of a sudden, for 9 months, baby felt mom move. And all of a sudden, mom's not moving.
Mm.
And I've had adult clients say, I thought my mother was dying or my mother was dead. Because everybody can try this. If you imagine, you're in a moving dialogue, you've got one person, the other person, we can feel each other. We can feel the movement. And then if you're used to this for 9 months, and then all of a sudden one hand stops moving, it's like, wait a minute, what's going on over there? And then you could start to panic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially when your environment is predominantly water and the vibrations that would come with something like that.
Absolutely. And that's why we like to go back and, ponder, think about what was going on. What were the messages prenatally?
Mm-hmm.
Was there miscarriages before you were born? Was there an abortion? Was mom, did mom lose a parent? And so her pregnancy was so full of grief and loss, because an infant will pick all of this up and think it's part of them because it's existence. They don't have the context that, oh, that's my mother's anxiety. I'm okay. Or that's the cultural collective fear going on.
Yeah.
Or the ancestral. And what's so brilliant about being able to slow down and look like beneath the surface to the hidden stories in our implicit memory is the body will heal. The implicit memory will come to the surface and become explicit. We'll start to have associations click in. I call it connecting the dots. Like I didn't know until my 40s why I buried my lunch bag. But when I did, it was like, oh, I was connecting the dots to my childhood's intelligence. And so what happens is people get these insights about why they've behaved the way they do. And they start connecting the dots and having compassion instead of blame for themselves or blame on the world. Simon, some people get stuck blaming the world. Other people get stuck attacking themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And neither of those is a healing place. But when you can slow down and get guided how to feel your senses, what are you sensing? And then what's the emotion? And then what's the thought? You've got the map. And then you can start looking, oh, my map is full of filters. Why I never finish a project is because I didn't get to finish my birth. If I was born C-section, I might be afraid of finishing projects.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, please carry on.
I had one little girl I tell this story a lot, so some people may have heard it, but it was just so revealing to me. The first time I saw her, and I always have the mom with their child in my treatment room, she walks into my office, she walks around, and then she goes into the corner behind the Japanese folding screen, which was blocking a door to another office. I had soundproof tape there. And all of a sudden she's behind there and I hear this rip, 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 and she is ripping the tape off the wall. And then she's taking that tape and she is taping up the crack, between the 3 panels of the Japanese folding screen, and she's taping up the crack. And I was like, oh, what are you doing, honey? And she goes, very important work, and don't you come in. And I thought about that, and I was like, I bet you were born C-section. Sure enough, that was her whole healing process, was her going back through the confusion of that experience, literally the sensory experience of a C-section, and integrating it so it no longer caused her to create weird behavior. She was she came from a good family, siblings, they were fine at home, a bright little girl. And then when she went to preschool, she started grabbing another kid, creating a barricade in the classroom somewhere, and not letting the kid out. The kid had to be in there with her. And then the teachers, of course, would have to come separate them. And then she'd have these big emotional meltdowns.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why she came to me. And once we realized, oh, she was separated from her mom. She didn't know where she was. She didn't feel safe. There were lots of pieces to the puzzle. By the end of her treatment, she had integrated the whole dang story. It was beautiful to see. So it just teaches me that we as human beings have an implicit memory. If we can work with it through our body awareness and looking in the mirror at our own behavior, we can unravel the puzzle. It's almost like you have to have a little detective hat and figure out, why do I do this? This isn't normal. You know, why do I avoid promotions? Why do I never start? You know, I have a great idea, but never get started. That can often be because of your journey through the birth canal. It's not always that, but it could be.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I'd love to talk about like sensitive kids and where that kind of maybe stems from, but you know, because I think sensitivity is certainly a gift rather than a weakness. I think most people would agree with that. Once they, you know, I think a lot of individuals would like their partners to be more sensitive, or they'd like to be more sensitive. You know, I think that it can be an incredible superpower. But parents often worry that they're, you know, doing maybe something wrong when they've got sensitive children. How do you think parents can support those sensitive children without, you know, burning out or blaming themselves for it?
First, you know, blessings to those parents, because it's a challenge.
Yeah.
When you have a child who can't regulate, and they can't, you know, put on a shirt because it's got a tag on the back. They've got tactile issues, or they've got auditory issues. There's too much, you know, in a classroom of other kids, there's too much noise. Those parents are always trying to compromise or get the right food. Yeah. I wrote a book called Help for Sensory Challenges, just so parents could help their kids reinform their body. How we heal is we get new information coming in, not just our filter saying, but we give ourselves new information, like I'm squeezing myself, because proprioception often helps someone feel that they exist. And proprioception you get in the birth canal. You get pressed as you have to rotate and come out. But a kid born C-section doesn't get that proprioception. A baby stuck in the birth canal could dissociate and not realize they even made it through. So you could have a kid who's a little lost. You know, they're nice and kind, but they're like kind of lost.
Yeah.
Because they haven't come all the way back and survived that terrifying experience and put it into context, so that then they know, the brain goes, oh, that was, my birth was a moment in time. It's not a forever tragedy. And especially if there was chemicals, then you've got the brain influenced by chemicals early on, and the chemicals take over, because that's what they're designed to do, those pain chemicals. And they, you know, they dissociate a kid. So you've got lots of ways to heal, is what I'm trying to say. When you can, so for those parents, in answer to your question, I would say get my book because it has very specific step-by-step things you can do. A mom came to me with her 3 kids, and I finally realized I need to write a book here so that parents are not stuck with just having to go to the expert. They can actually understand what's happening and add layers of new input so that you're working with the pressure, weight and pressure. Then you work with tactile, with the skin. And then you can work with auditory. Is there bilateral crossing of the brainstem? You can work with visual. These are the things that I help parents understand. It's not hopeless. Don't think you have to keep accommodating to your child.
Mm-hmm.
Help build a resilient child, because it's not fair for a child to grow up thinking the world's going to accommodate to them.
Yeah.
That's
a good point. That's a really good point. Getting those children prepared for, adulthood, which is a huge, big job of parenting. And I'd love to talk about nutrition and a nervous system, especially with healing. You're talking about resilience there and how important that is. And at Truehope, we are always talking about the vitally important role of correcting nutritional deficiencies that so many people have, and dealing with things at a root cause preventative approach. How do you see physical nourishment and the nervous system regulation working together in supporting emotional resilience and ultimately healing?
Well, I would say it's the primary foundation. That if, we have people who have survived all kinds of difficult things and still done well. And so we don't want to say it's always this, always that.
Sure.
But we do know that many obese children, sometimes it's there because they're eating obesely, but it could be that they're a generation ago, or the grandparent generation was in a starvation system.
Yep.
And they got the epigenetics of I need to hoard my food in my body.
Yep.
And so when you start to give new information with good nutrition, it can break up that idea. It's like, oh, my epigenetics says I have to hoard. However, I'm actually being nourished with good nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And that dissonance starts to produce health. It starts to let go the emotional trauma of the past and rebuild a nutritional foundation. I know for myself, my mom was on diet pills when she was pregnant with me. So that basically flooded my system with amphetamines.
Wow.
And lack of nourishment because she was dieting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was born 3 pounds, 4 ounces. I was a little thing. And then when you add nicotine on top of that, that gives you that excitation, depression flow that nicotine produces. And for me, it was when I really paid, and I remember in my 30s, I got exposed to eating we ate healthy as a family, so that was good. We had vegetables, we had our proteins and our vegetables, and I'm old enough that there was still some nutrition in the food. Back in the, I was born in 1954, and for me, at age 31, I got exposed to. I found the company Light Force Spirulina. I found the spirulina food, and that's an algae that it's part animal, part plant. And I paid attention to my nutrition, and I've been eating that every day since my 30s. Awesome. What I noticed when I got the right balance in my system is I could focus my brain. I used to have trouble going into a grocery store and getting overwhelmed by all the choices. Or even into the public library, I get overwhelmed by all the, information living on the shelves. And once I had that nutritional base, I stabilized. It was fascinating to observe that, wow, I feel different. And I think when you get the right nutritional base, it definitely produces new sensory input. It's nutritive input that is, guiding the nervous system. So we need that healthy fats. We need, like in my work, I teach a lot of movement and sensory awareness as part of healing. And I studied for decades with a brilliant woman, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, who developed the ability to teach us, how do you feel your muscle system? How do you feel your bone system? Like the living mind of the muscles, mind of the bones, mind of the fat. And that awakened healthy fat, it myelinates your nerves. And if we're not getting the right fats in our body, how do we keep nutritionally able to have that supportive system?
Absolutely.
So part of it, yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned so many amazing things there. What really stands out to me is the fact that when people are in a stressed sympathetic state, it's a massive challenge for you to maintain optimal weight, because your energy, everything is going towards that fight, flight, freeze situation, and you're literally not in a rest and digest space. And if your body is in a calorically stressed position, you are going to be more susceptible to, let's just say, bad foods. And what's worse about that is, like, the food companies know that, and they actually prey on that. They prey on that whole system, that whole structure. They chemically manipulate to keep us in that stressed state, so we buy more, consume more, and we have to repeat that because there's no actual nutrition in these foods. So we have to eat more and more and more and more for that more neurological fix rather than a physical cessation. And the great example of that is when people go on vacation and they don't eat brilliantly, or they might drink a little bit too much alcohol. It doesn't actually affect them as much as it would when they do those things at home, when they're not in their normal environment. They're on vacation, they're by the beach, they're by the pool, their nervous system is relaxed. Therefore, their nervous system is in a completely different situation. Their biology, their digestion, they're actually able to engage these systems really well. I know so many people that go to, like, Italy and France, eat their faces off, and they come back lighter than they went there. It's a very, very interesting phenomenon. And I think that when you're able to use, like some of our products, especially the Empower Plus, which is this 37 ingredient broad spectrum micronutrient that's giving you the foundational requirements that you need, that your brain needs, especially to do all of its incredible functions. And when you take on that foundational piece and you start giving your body that on a consistent basis, then your brain works better. You're able to actually engage your parasympathetic nervous system a lot easier. You can get there, and you end up making better choices. And your biology isn't working against you, because we're not in this World War I, World War II caloric starvation mode. We're in the complete opposite of that, where I could be in 5 minutes, I could be in 3 or 4 different fast food restaurants, eating my face off. So we're not in that stage anymore. But if people are chronically nutrient deficient, it's harder for their brain to, let's just say, make better choices without going like too deep into the neurological aspects of the brain signaling and brain chemistry. But I think a lot of people can relate to that. They have a busy day at work, and then they get home, kids are in bed, and then 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock is like, where a lot of people consume a lot of their calories, and they're not in the best possible forms. Everyone's got an example of that, I think. And that's just the way that our body kind of like works. Once it's in a relaxed rest state, that's where it's going to shift and engage differently. And I know that your work incorporates neuroplasticity a lot. We've talked a lot about that on the show, which is really interesting. And the brain's incredible ability to change, and
Mm-hmm.
it's able to do that so well. But for someone who's like struggled with, let's say, anxiety, trauma for decades, what gives you hope that healing is still possible in those situations?
Well, first off, if they're looking for healing,
Mm,
if they're still like, oh, I know there's something that this should be different. And I've seen people totally find the ease in their parasympathetic system once they have the right support to not carry the panic, the life or death threat that was from a moment in time. One example of this woman is doing brilliant healing. She, you know, she was way up in the mountains in Canada, and her parents had a little cafe there. And so they were very, no resources, just people would have to hike there to get there.
nice.
And what happened is she got a high fever. Her mom was working. Her mom comes back to check on her baby, and the baby's in this high fever. And the mother is like, grabs the baby and races down the mountain. So if you've ever had a high fever, you're kind of delusional anyway.
Yeah.
You're in a very strange state. And then her mother raced down the mountain to get help and bring her baby to a doctor. And every time she crossed the stream, she'd dunk the baby in ice cold water to cool her off. So when you think of a nervous system pattern, you've got high temperature delusion, quick shock cold, back and forth in the extremes. And then there's the sense like, will this ever end? Am I going to die? The fear the mother had, is her baby going to die? And then, luckily they got to the hospital, but the mom had to hitchhike with her baby to get to a hospital. And the first car was too slow. She got out. The second car ended up being her friend's, and they deliberately drove fast so they'd get a speeding ticket. And then the policeman stopped him and realized what was going on and led him to the hospital with the siren. So what we're thinking about is not this person specifically. We're thinking about the nervous system.
Yeah.
We're thinking about extreme exposures to inputs. So high fever input, ice cold water input, spatial dynamics of changing cars and speeding fast, and then auditory input of a police siren, and then they got medicines that helped reduce the fever, and she survived. She's bright and brilliant and all of that, but she's had to learn to stabilize all of that existential and learn how to identify it. Oh, that's what it was. This is why I go into high arousal. This is why I go into depression. And, a nutritional foundation can help interrupt the swings that will happen in the nervous system based on emotions. I think you have to do, in addition to nutrition, it's very helpful if you kind of look at the psychological imprints and put them to rest. But if you're just doing that and not building your nutrition, you're working too hard.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. I'd love to finish off with kind of like a bonus question, just to kind of get people thinking about what they can do, especially when they're in like struggling situations. So if someone's listening and they feel stuck, perhaps they've tried therapy, they've tried medication, I don't know, they've tried meditation, they've tried everything that they've been recommended, and they've tried these different approaches, and they still feel overwhelmed with what they've experienced. What would you want them to know about their capacity, their own ability to heal and have hope?
I would say that don't give up, first off. Don't give up that there's there's something and a way for you to heal. Because so often you start going to all the authorities and it doesn't work, and you paid a lot of money and you're still miserable. That's not helpful. Sometimes people have to slow down and rest their cheek against their own distress. It's helpful to have guidance. You can have a good therapist supporting you to do that. But when you come into relationship with your distress, not in a way to try to get it away or fix it, but what's the hidden story in there? Why does this keep happening? Is maybe my soul is saying, I want you to listen. I have to tell you this because I need your help. And learning to kind of slow down and trust that you can find a hidden story is really important. And then I think you do need sometimes outer support. What I teach people how to do is to take a difficult situation and put it outside of themselves, like in stuffed animals. I do always this with stuffed animals with the children, or with adults. I'll say, okay, let's put this experience out here and look at it together. So then you're going to put, like, let an object hold, like, oh, here's the car that hit me. Oh, here's the time in the hospital. Oh, here's the back pain. And when you externalize it, the brain goes, oh, those are the pieces of the puzzle. Okay, I can, it's not life-threatening anymore. I can organize it. And I can get a little bigger than that old experience. So I can give myself good messages, not all the life-threatening messages that are bubbling up. So I would say get good help, don't give up, eat well, get your nutrition, make sure you have movement, enough breath and exercise. Because if you just become sedentary, everything starts to shut down.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. Great input. I love that final piece. Such a beautiful way to give a lot of people who are struggling these days just a little bit of hope, and that's what we try to do. And for a lot of people who do find us here at True Hope, we're their last hope, because they've tried so many different things to get better, and then they find this incredibly well researched product, and their brain and their body shifts, and they're able to see, let's say, they're able to see the light, and then they're able to do all these other important things that we've spoken about that's going to help with their psychological state. So they're able to recognize how important sleep is, how important their diet is, how important moving their body is, how important it is to reach out to friends and community for support, because we are not supposed to be human beings isolated in a dark room on our phones. We're not designed to do that at all. No. It goes against a lot of years of biology and cultural evolution. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Annie. I really appreciate your insights today and your stories. Thank you so much. Where is the best place people can learn more about you and check out some of your great books?
The most simple way is just to go to my website, anniebrook.com. And Brook is Brook. You'll find video resources. You'll find a free PDF library. You'll find classes you can join, or even deeper training. And then I also have a free Instagram account with a lot of resources. So if you just have little time, but you need a quick, like, oh, that's how I need to remember to think about this well, or what I can do. I share lots of tools there as well. And that is just Instagram.com/AnnieBrookTherapy. So amazing. My website or my Instagram. Thanks, Simon, so much. And for giving people hope, and not just hope, but results.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll make sure that those links are in the show notes so people can find your website, your social media, your books, etc. I've got a couple of books on there that I've got my eye on, so I'll make sure people have got the ability to check those out. But again, Annie, thank you so much for coming on the show. So good.
Yeah, my pleasure, Simon. Thank you. Bye for
Beautiful.
now.
Well, that is it for this episode of True Hope Cast, the official podcast of True Hope Canada. We will be with you again very shortly. I think a couple of weeks, the next episode's going to hit. But until then, we'll see you soon.